yeah, my name is Greg Short. You know, EverQuest was where I started my career in video games. Formally, I guess 20-something years ago now. It's a really cool story because, you know, I was originally born in Australia. I had a bunch of friends, and we, you know, I was in law school, and we were playing MUDs and UO and going to LAN parties, jumping on Kali and playing Descent and all the old school ways that we play games on modems. And the beta for EQ was coming up. I only found out about it because I was at a LAN party with a couple of other people in our UO guild. We all played on Sonoma. We were hardcore PKers running around causing mischief, as Australians do. And yeah, so they talked about the beta, and it sounded great. So I was fortunate enough at the time that my sort of paying the bills job was working at a computer store. So I had access to getting cards and things like that for cost, which was a big deal back then because 3D graphics cards like the Voodoo and the 3DFX and all that stuff was brand new stuff. I could have one of those. Or to even have a sound card, like a dedicated sound card, and not just have your little like boop, 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 you know, coming out of your x86. And so yeah, so got into the late stages of the and from there started playing EverQuest, and that I don't really remember the next 3 years. I think I logged 2.5 years of playtime in 3 years or some crazy amount of time. It was a blur, but that's where it all began. Started up a little website called EQ Enchanters. Originally, I picked an enchanter to play, and purely because it's like they can enchant items, which we all discovered is not the case. Enchanters never really could enchant items. They could make jewelry. That was about it. And so yeah, started a website about that, and yeah, I guess EverQuest just blew up. Right, we went from no one to everyone playing EQ, and I had been working a second job. By the time EQ came out, I kind of had transitioned fully to it, where I was a night admin at a ISP that was hosting websites for small businesses in Australia through MCI WorldCom. And I would, you know, play EverQuest in the day, and at night I'd go and I'd be working the graveyard shift, watching lights blink, waiting for a phone call from someone who, you know, broke their website and needed help. And so I started running this website for EQ, and within it was good back then because I had free hosting. I didn't have to pay for anything. It was like a perk of the job. We could have websites, and then my boss pulled. He's like, "Hey, is this your website that you run?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, you know, I've been playing around." It's like, "Yeah, it's like you have more traffic than like any website on our network." He's like, "What the hell is it? Is it porn?" I'm like, no, it's like video.
Kinda.
You know? And he's like, "Yeah, you're gonna have to start paying something if you want to keep doing it." And it was fortuitous because right around that time, I got approached by an ad network, because back then, this is, you know, still .com bubble hadn't burst yet, and I got approached by UGO, which was, you know, there was CNET and UGO. There were a few of these people out there back then that were buying ad space on sites, and so they called me up and they're like, "Hey, you know, you seem like a popular website for this EverQuest thing. We have a couple of other. We have Everlaw. They were another game site at the time. You seem to show up very high next to them on Google searches, and you know, you don't seem to have an ad provider. Do you want to make money off your website?" And I'm like, "Sure, you know, I'll take free money. My host, I've got to start finding hosts." I said, "Can you use my website too?" And they're like, "Sure, yeah, no problem. We'll host you and we'll pay you." I'm like, "Done, great deal." And so, yeah, so then after that, I discovered that you can make a lot of money off banner ads pre.com in 2000. So we took the money that we were making, which, I mean, look, I mean, I was just a student in college at the time, and so to go from a website into a website that was making $5,000 a month was a big deal, because that was 10,000 Australian dollars a month. And as a lawyer, maybe I would have made $40,000 a year for the first couple of years after I graduated. So I put my law degree on hold, and I took all the money that I was making from the website, and I hired a programmer, and we took EQ Enchanters down, which was built on Microsoft front page extensions. If any of you are old, long ago, who built horrible websites using Microsoft's early generation web tools, that was terrible. So then we went and actually built a real site with a proper SQL database using, well, back then, VB script ASP, and Caster's Realm was born. So initially, all we did was the casters, enchanters, magicians, wizards, that type of stuff, necromancers, and the robes. And that lasted 2 months before we just got so many requests from people to expand into the other classes that we just made it a general EverQuest site. And I think within 6 months, we had 95% of the EverQuest population visiting the site every day. I mean, we really were one of the first, I think probably one of, there was Stratix. There were a couple others who were making money running it, but they were still largely doing it from volunteers. But we were one of the first websites to really treat it as a business and go full commercial and hire full-time engineers and programmers that we were paying salaries to build databases and build tools. And we set up I got to know the PR people very closely at Verint and SOE. We would have weekly phone calls, but back then it was like ICQ chat and IRC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Skype was very new. I don't think it even fully existed yet. But we were chatting a lot, and we, as you know, whenever it came out, there was no information about the game. Nobody knew anything. I mean, the manual there was a writer manual. I think you guys finished the manual about 5 hours before the game shipped. Put something in the box.
Yeah,
often. Such a last second ditch. And thankfully, through beta, I'd gotten to know a few of the different websites that did have some information on them, and we were then able to sort of bring all the beta information to a central location. And then I reached out to a lot of people who ran some of those sites, and basically did content exchange deals where we eventually brought some of those people into our websites. It was all about just trying. It was such a community-driven thing. And what's really cool about EQ. So I started on Povar, and then I found out that Alakazam and Ilya were also on Povar. So the two biggest EQ websites were basically we were all on Povar. We talk together and we chat together and hang out.
I was trying to remember because I remembered Ilya, and I was trying to remember what the website was, but I remember every fanfare, like hanging out, eventually running into Ilya pretty early on and grabbing some beers. But
yeah. So he was a programmer for the ZAM network, and then Alakazam, interestingly, was also an ex-lawyer. So you got these two ex-lawyers who basically ditched law to go and through video games because we could make more money, and it was a hell of a lot more fun. Dealing with legal stuff. So it was a really cool time. I mean, it was such a at one point I think we must have had on Caster's Realm over 200 volunteers who were responsible for helping us with just putting items in, and maintaining the item database was insane. Like this was all before people had really written Lucy type stuff to rip the spell code system open and read the data files of the games. Like it was all manual. Like we were literally sitting there manually writing tools to reverse engineer what the game team was putting into the game. And as an item would drop, we had a submission form and people would submit a screenshot, and then we'd go and type in all of the stuff. And so you can imagine, like the worst time of my life was every expansion when a new race came out and every single item had changed, right? I mean, because it's like manually going through and trying to find every single item that now is XR capable or Shaman capable or whatever. So it was brutal. I mean, we worked hours and hours, and it eventually cut into the game time. Like I would basically, I started off in a guild of all my Australian friends called the Dark Ministry, and there was me. There was a guy called Grunneth, who was a little paladin, and dwarf paladin, and he was one of my original programmers. There was a ranger called Specky, who was in charge of all of our ranger stuff. Hobo, who was a cleric, a whole bunch of stuff. And we eventually merged with another guild. It was just a few friends from Canada, Zar and High Fever and High Hutchie, and they had a guild called Triton, which was named after an ATM that they saw when they were at a casino one time. And so we got into Triton, and Triton became one of the top 4 raid guilds across all of EverQuest over the next years. And so it was a great source for me, because my playtime really dropped down. I couldn't play too much. I rotated my character out with some roommates that I had, because at that point I'd moved to the US over time and was living with a guild of pretty hardcore players, and who were all in the same guild. And so we'd rotate so that my enchanter character would stay at level and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's where I got a lot of information from. You had to kind of be in a tier 1 raiding guild, or chatting with FOH or those guys, Afterlife, knowing those guilds that were pushing the envelope on the game if you wanted to sort of have the latest and greatest information and hear what was happening on the test server. So that was over a few-year period. That was sort of the my EQ days, which ran until 2004 when I had to sell that business and I went to work for Sony for a few years.
So we had a question pop up from Todd Schmidt, Hobart, in chat. It said, "Curious, Greg, did any of us developers at the time leak any information to you to help with your website data?"
So I never got a direct leak in terms of like, here's a dump of a file, or here's the dump of data. And you know what? I never asked. I probably should have asked. I just assumed that the answer would be no. But as Todd would know, I mean, I got very close with a lot of the devs. I mean, even coming from Australia, I went to every fanfare. Alakazam and I and Ilya, we used to throw massive parties for everybody. I'm not sure if any of you attended, but there was never a shortage of booze and good times in the fanfare parties. And it's true, the Fat Burger was delicious.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was really probably the closest in terms of leaked information was the close relationship that I formed with GZ. We were a caster first site. I think I was probably one of the fan sites to really reach out and try to work very closely with Jeff. And of course, as you know, Jeff and I ended up going to business together with EEDAR many years later. And it's actually an interesting story. So I came out to the US to, I kind of went pro with Casters Rome in like February of 2000. And then I came out to the US specifically to come to the studio and meet all the devs. And I had a laundry list of items that I'd collected from a little class in the game that was caster at the time, because we weren't doing all the other ones yet. And so I sat down with him, and one of the big things that we talked about at the time was how underpowered enchanters were. Completely selfish, obviously, playing an enchanter. But we were a pretty worthless class. We didn't have clarity at that point in time in the game. And in fact, that's the number one thing that came out of that conversation that I had with him. Was we sat down over lunch and we were chatting about ways that we could make them more appealing. And we found a couple of spells that really didn't seem like anybody was using them very much. They didn't seem like they were very necessary, given the way the meta of the game was evolving. And that's how Clarity was born. We decided that a mana regen spell similar to Spirit of Wolf would be a good augmentation to their skill set. So I'm 50% responsible for Clarity Crack, and GZ being the other 50% who obviously made the final call.
It's interesting because I had never made the association, like essentially the two of you going into EEDAR. I didn't realize that connection had existed back then, and that's what led to it. So That's fun to hear.
As you know, I mean, the thing that's crazy about if you look at where everyone who has been involved with EverQuest has gone on to, I mean, some people have gone on to do such amazing things in different games, different studios,
Mm.
and just in their careers, and it's really pretty cool, the talent that was amassed in those early 2000 years at SOE and around the game of EverQuest itself, and just the lasting impression and the friendships. The friendships have gone on for 20 plus years. You know, there are still people now who, when I get together with them, we're talking about EverQuest, even though we've done business across a million other things. We're reminiscing on guck runs and camping out, you know, J boots, all the old things that we used to do back in the day.
Right on. Yeah, it felt like it was a beacon, right? So it's just going to draw certain personality types and people that just, I think, especially at the time, have a certain drive. So that's probably part of it, but a lot of it was just, I don't know, kind of fortunate timing as well. Yeah. So guys, how long is the AFK timer? The way I have this thing rigged right now is I'm gonna have to
You can click in periodically. I know I'll disappear for a second, but you can
All
click
right.
in and move around for a bit, and then bring me
Cool.
back. There you go.
And you're back. All right. So there was a question early on that was because you mentioned juicy rumor. What was the question from Balls was, what's the juiciest rumor that you know of?
Juiciest rumor that I know of. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, God, do you talk about rumors of back in the day with the game, or are you talking about rumors of rumors today about where people have gone? Let's go with the safe one. Let's go with rumors.
Go with the safe one, yeah.
Rumors of back in the day. I'm not going current day. That'll get too many people in trouble in the current political environment that we're in. I don't think anything's safe right now. It's all old school. You know, you can probably attest to this. So I believe, wasn't there was a GM who got fired, or an assistant designer who got fired because they were found, you know, producing items and selling them for real life money. Do you remember who that was?
I'm not going to say who it was.
There was a dev, right? It was a big deal internally.
Yeah, so there, and I, no, it wasn't me. Come on, is that what you think of me? You think I would actually get caught? They still haven't found the back doors I put in there. You don't know what NPCs I'm talking to at night. You don't know, dude. I barely play this gnome, and look at how powerful he is now. 43, I think. You just got to talk to the right NPCs. So anyway, I remember the dude. I don't remember his name, honestly. Sean is a coward. No, I think there's legal reasons why I can't mention this guy's name. Yeah, but
Todd probably knows more about this. He was closer to this, I think.
Well, wasn't there a certain breastplate involved? Wasn't that how it got discovered? Because the breastplate had never officially dropped on that server because the thing that dropped the breastplate had never been killed. And that's what triggered the whole event.
I don't know if it was that, or if it was because at some point he generated a fiery Avenger or something. I don't remember what it was.
Well, I remember the dude and the breastplate, so there may have been more than one. But
yeah. So anyway, it was a that was a crazy one. But I guess another one. You know, I mean, you know, back in the day, it was kind of funny. You know, the amount of dupe bugs and stuff that were out there that you could use to help drive things. And so early on, part of what I had access to through a guild was you know, they were dupe and plat bars, and it was part of how we were able to fund a lot of research for stuff for people. So we were taking the plat bars and selling them for gold and giving them to different trade skills on the server to help them accelerate getting their trade skills up, so that we could understand what it was that, you know, how it worked. Because trade skilling was such a grind. It was the worst back in the early days. And so yeah, I mean, it's yeah, lots of fun things that happened back then. But now I think it's sad. I think people want games to be exploit free and bug free, and I think that it's a I just think that part of the fun of the game was finding ways to use the exploits, and until you got caught. I mean, there was so many geometry exploits where you could just bring a train of mobs up and camp on a rock, and they would just get stuck behind the rock, and you could just sit there for an hour and burn them down. And I mean, but that was part of the fun back in the early days. Just
most of those bugs, I think, were Todd's fault. So I'm pretty sure Todd is single-handedly responsible for the pathing in EverQuest. So please send him your feedback. Yeah, no, it was part of the fun. It was so unpolished in so many different ways that it was like, it was fun finding those weird opportunities, right? You weren't on a specific path. You were looking for this weird opportunity that somebody discovered.
Yeah, and part of the part of the game was like, how well can you min max?
Mm-hmm.
I know you know Tom Blair, and he was one of my roommates, and God, he got so good at power leveling up, man. It was crazy. And
he's in chat, so I'm waiting for him to resurface again.
Yeah, he did. You see, he's Blickstep, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So back then he was Bentos, and he had a bunch of different names that he had, and busy power leveling you. So the funny thing is that I want to say that there was an Ixar monk that he created at one point that we power leveled from 0 to 60, and I want to say it was like 3 or 4 days. It was because that was just how mature and how good they'd gotten at doing the power leveling side of things. And we had in my house, when I came over I had 4 different computers set up for boxing and for different things, and working on one and taking screenshots of the other. We were actually one of the first websites at Casters Realm to do video, like professional videos that we'd created things. We did all of the original, the Battle of the Best. They're still out there on YouTube somewhere. These old school Battle of the Best videos. I literally was like running around with a ghost character on test, trying to capture footage of people and putting it to music. And it was all just part of the fun. Part of the fun was just like, how can you, what has never been done before? There's so much stuff that had never been done before. I was actually going through the website on the Wayback Machine, because it's the only way you can see it now. I sold it to Yu-Gi-Oh! They shut it down a few years later. And I was going back through the Wayback Machine and looking at some of the things that we had done. I mean, it was so cool. We hired a professional artist to do art for all the classes, which was really cool. We were the first website ever, I think, for any game or MMO where we created a full character profile system where you could go in and you could say, this is my character, and you could pick all the gear that you had in the slots, and it would calculate out for you, like, well, this is how much money you're going to have, and this is all the other stuff that you're going to do. Yeah, look at that. What a lot. And I actually was going back over the character thing. At one point, we had like 170,000 characters in the system, and you could log in and see who played what time zone, and you could look up people to bring into your groups, looking for guilds, all these community tools before they really existed. Now, of course, they're built into the games, which I had a hand with when I went to go work for Sony. Talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, that's what I'd say.
This was done by a friend of Graph. You remember Graph, who ran the Wizard website? Mm-hmm. So he had this friend of his called William someone. I can't remember his last name. And so I paid him $100 US for all of these hand-drawn sketches back in the day. And then we had them all on Cafe Press, and you'd go to convention and people would have coffee cups, pads, or mugs, or whatever that they would use to support their little class and things.
Yeah, and so, like you're saying, that then evolved. I knew of your work from the websites, like mainly as a consumer of, I mean, like going there for information. But then when you got to Sony, that was a period then where that really kicked off a lot of the work that we've seen with regards to like character management and all of that, right? That was,
Yeah.
and I keep spacing on the
I don't know
name
what
on it.
happened to your Twitch stream. It got blurry.
It's the connection today is just it's been a bit rough on this end.
Where are you? Germany, Sweden?
I'm in Stockholm, Sweden,
Okay.
and oddly the challenges I have with my connection here, but I mean I can't complain too much. I'm streaming via Wi-Fi instead of a hard line, so it's kind of on me.
Amateur hour, man. Amateur hour.
It is. It is. It is. Despite all the big bucks I've been raking in here, I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it authentic, very amateurish.
All right. Well, hopefully I won't be pixelated one, but it's good actually. I feel like it shaved a few years off me, so that's cool.
It's beauty mode.
So what happened with how I ended up working at Sony? 2000 came, .com crash, everything blew up. We were the #2 website for UGO at the time. So us and a handful of others, it was like a wrestling site and a couple. They basically came and said, "Hey, we're going to pay you 10% of what we used to pay you, but at least you'll get a check if you want it. Otherwise, you'll get nothing, and you can figure out your stuff." I kind of felt like the bubble was coming. We had a little bit of money saved up in reserve, and we'd already been working on a new website, technology, guildz.com, GUILDZ.com, because GUILDS was owned by some, I don't know, church or something. And so we went and built what was probably, I still think it was probably one of the first. There was one other company that was doing something similar at the time. I can't remember what they were. It was guildpages.com, wherever they were. But we built a system where we were able to link our casters' own database together with this Guild website. And if you went and registered, you could pick a subdomain with all these domains that we'd bought, and we would generate for you a raid calendar, private messaging, DKP tracking, forums, an IRC, dedicated IRC secure chat channel, like everything that you needed to run a guild. You could pay like $10 a month, and you'd have a pretty cool looking guild page. And I think we got like, I don't know, 700 or 800 guilds. And at that point I was living in San Diego with my guildies. And so I went and pitched it to SMED, and Andy Zaffron and the team at SOE. And I also pitched it to Blizzard for World of Warcraft, to see who would want which one first. And it was radio silence. I was getting a little bit worried because I was like, crap, I built this tech. The game plan was always that a game company would buy it. I've pitched it to both of them, and it's crickets. Shit, got a bunch of money, and it's going to be a flop. And so SOE finally came together and called and said, hey, we want to use this for EQ2. We think this would be a really cool community feature, but we'd want to build it internally on our tech stack, tie it directly to the game's database, all that kind of stuff. So we went and negotiated that. We kind of cut a deal, and I literally signed that that contract. And I think about 12 days later, a call from Blizzard asking me to do a deal for them. And looking back, I signed the wrong piece of paper, I guess. But it's a path, right? Either way, you just do the journey and say it's all it all happens for a reason.
So, Greg, there was a question while we're still in range there. Which IRC network were the channels on, if you recall? Do you know?
So, God, I don't. I'd have to go and see if it's on the Wayback Machine to try and remember. So long ago. There was one. It was funny because one of the guys who worked for me was a huge IRC guy. In fact, he was one of the admin mods for the entire the network. He was like a super user, and we used whatever one that he was sort of running and managing on. But I don't remember. Sorry. No, it wasn't Stratix. Although an interesting story with Stratix, as we talk a little bit. So right before I did this deal where Guildz came into SOE, and we can talk about all the cool stuff we did with that and the headaches I caused developers in a minute. But right before that, the year before that, in 2003, IGE, the gold company, was buying up all the websites for traffic. And so there was this opportunity we had where Alakazam, Stratix, a couple of other sites, we all flew to Miami, and we had a meeting with the owners, and we talked about it and talked about how the deal might be structured. And then we kind of left, and Alakazam and a few of the others went in and got bought by IGE and became the ZAM network. And Stratix and us talked on the side, and we decided to actually merge in. So I bought Stratix, and it became, we were actually going to merge Casters Realm into the Stratix network because it was actually a bigger brand at the time. Stratix had been around forever from UO, kind of stuff. And so I put a bunch of money into that, modernizing the Stratix technology stack and helping move things forward. And then when I did the deal for Sony and sell them, license in the technology, Guildz, and all the premium stuff that I then went and built, they made me sell Casters Realm. It was part of the deal. They didn't want me owning one of the larger fan sites while I was basically contracting and working very closely internally at SOE. Makes sense. I get it. So I actually backed the deal back. I let Stratix keep all the money and all the new tech and all the rebranding and everything that I did for them. I gave it back to Ryan and said, hey, man, and Scott, I said, look, you guys need to take this. I don't want you to get caught up in the complexities of this deal. Then I called UGO and I sold them Casters Realm, and I gave Stratix back, and then I went back into the beast of SOE and spent the next few years kind of defining what is now the Armory. You know, if you play Blizzard games, for us it was all called Station Players, right? That was the big thing that we built.
So Tom Blair's got a question for you. Before you answer that, I'm going to wiggle my mouse a second. There we go. Actually, let me wiggle it a little more. Let me frame this a little bit. I don't want to lose my gnome in the background. Great. Now I won't get logged out.
I don't know. We're so blurry today. It's a shame. Oh, well, it's all the audio. At least you can enjoy the audio.
Yeah. So, is he blurry for the rest of you guys as well, or is it his fiber?
Oh, it's not blurry for you. It's just blurry for me.
See?
I guess maybe it doesn't like the fact that I'm streaming through Discord and doing Twitch at the same time. But that's cool, as long as it looks good for you guys.
You look beautiful on my end. And so let's go back up. We are supposed to ask you about your Aussie programmer who would go on walkabout for months.
Yeah, so that was actually pretty funny. So Tom remembers this. So I had two programmers at the time. One of them was the original programmer, and one was a second one who kind of became the lead programmer over time. And we were at a point where we were doing a pretty major upgrade to the code. The guy who was leading that basically just stopped replying to messages, emails. He disappeared off the face of the planet for well over a month. And I was increasingly stressed out at that. And so ultimately I got on a plane and I flew home and I drove to his doorstep and I banged on it and I was able to get a hard disk that had everything of all of the code and everything that we had on it. And I drove that 12 hours up to my other coder and said, here's all the code, keep going. So yeah, that was an adventure because at the time it was hard. I mean, we didn't have any kind of this internet distributed coding really working very well. It was just FTP. You know, I don't think Subversion even existed back when we were doing this stuff. I mean, there was no code repo type stuff for general people, no GitHub. And so, yeah, that was pretty scary. There's another pretty scary thing that happened actually in like 2002, I guess. We were at Casters Realm was co-located out of a server in Costa Mesa, and some junior IT guy decided to test the UPS system for all the servers and literally blew my server into pieces. There was a power hookup incorrect in my cage, and they just blew it to pieces. And so we were down for 3 months.
Was this
yeah.
Was this during all the brownouts and shit? Like, were they testing it because of the fact that, I mean, when I worked at Sony the first few years, the lights were like brown. I'd never seen that shit before in an office building.
Yeah, no, we had crazy power issues down there. This was up in Costa Mesa, so it's possible it was related. But yeah, so that was scary. I ended up getting in a big lawsuit with the colo facility, and because they couldn't find my backups. I've been paying for backups, and they couldn't find them. And meanwhile, I was losing audience and losing ad dollars and all of these sorts of things, and ultimately we were taken to court. And then on the day that we were meant to go to the arbitrator, the CEO called me up. It's like, oh yeah, I found your backup. Yeah, a little bit too little, too late, but it basically destroyed our lawsuit because we were suing them for fraud. Otherwise, they had a limitation of liabilities clause we didn't have to pay them for. So anyway, so yeah, so I lost a whole bunch of money into that, and that really precipitated us pushing super aggressively into getting Guildz, a deal done with Guildz, because it was very hard. You know, when a fan site is down for 3 months, people think you're gone, right? I mean, you know, we just lost way too much audience to
3 months
pull it all back together. And Guildz was a better business deal, and honestly, it had a much better long-term impact for players because, you know, I think you were working on the EQ. Now you were still working on EQ because you're right towards the end of EQ2, I believe, right?
Yeah.
On the EQ2 team.
I wound up only being on EQ2 for like 2 or 3 weeks before moving over to the PlanetSide team. That was 2004.
Yeah, so that was right before launch. So I think I went in there early 2004, late 2003, to start building out the station player stuff. And you know, Scott Hartzman, you know, it's a shame he's not here because he can tell you how terrible it was when I came into the organization. Now here I am, you know, very cash incentivized from my contract to help this product be as successful as possible for EQ2. And so I was super aggressive trying to get resources and get developer time, which, as you know, there was no resources or developer time on the EQ2 team. But we somehow managed to scrounge it all together and build a system, really the first game ever that was really dynamically, from a base perspective, capturing and spitting out real event data into the database on who was the first person to ever find that item, who was the first guild ever to finish a quest or beat a mob, and time stamping that and then celebrating that out throughout the game world. You know, having a true real-time web-based player to character mapping system. So as your inventory in the game changed to the web and see the exact loadout that you had on your character. You know, it got even cooler when we went into Vanguard. You know, Vanguard had a longer dev cycle. And so I got to work with Brad and Ryan Elam and a bunch of those guys. And we even had, you know, we had a patent file for this. I think it actually got awarded to SOE. But it was kind of like you know, the roster photo cam system. So every time you did something major, like you leveled up or you beat a boss mob on a major quest for the first time, the system would automatically take a screenshot for you of where you were, what you did, and where you were wearing, and give you a little timestamp, and it would dynamically into a blog for you inside the website, so you could go back and relive all of your historical moments and remember what you did in the game. And it was also tied into the guild system, so you could you know, join up as a guild and take a screenshot, and it would upload it directly into your guild's website for you. So these were some of the cool things that we were building, like way back when. And nowadays you see a lot of these community tools out there, but back then we were pioneering. We were just coming up with, okay, we've got this data, like what's something to do with it? Like all the leaderboards that we had tons of leaderboards out there. Now leaderboards are everywhere, but
right.
You know, when you think about back then, and you know this, when we were running MMOs, like there was very little CPU overhead. right? I mean, especially on the database servers, those things were crunchy. And so we had to write some really clever ways to take that data from the database at a regular frequency and move it over to our own database and then do all this transformational work. And within a year of the game being out, there was so much data that it was taking us 21 hours to run the job to update daily. We were running out of time. Like the jobs were getting so big and all these calculations and things that we were doing, because it was just so, I'm sure these days we could write it a lot more efficiently and would use cloud tech to crunch the numbers better and do things. But back then, I think EQ2 was one of the first games that you guys used a full Oracle database for, if I recall. I think previous to that, you were still using text files and storing a lot of stuff in text, right?
Todd, you just spoke on this fact. I could have sworn that our design tool was access front end for like an Oracle DB, but there was a lot of other stuff stored in just random files.
Yeah, just text and files.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when we came back to build station players for EverQuest 1, I remember talking with, was it Terry Michaels? Was he the lead then, I think?
I think so.
And man, I got to tell you, the magic that we did to build station players for EverQuest 1 was insane. We had to write, it's pretty crazy. We had to write this invisible character loader system that would basically run as a job. You could get in to get a screenshot of your character made, but we had to actually load the character into a character loader screen to load the text file to then auto capture the screenshot and then take that screenshot and then auto load it back over to into your profiles. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff. There were things that we just didn't even know about your character unless it was loaded through the engine. Read the text files.
There's a lot of that stuff that I was expecting to see when I came back. Like, just started playing about 3 weeks, a month ago. And I was expecting a lot of that functionality to be pretty prominent when I got to the webpage. And I don't see it. Like, did this stuff disappear at some point?
Oh, yeah, Daybreak killed it all because it was too expensive to maintain.
Okay, because as you're describing, I forgot about some of it, right? Like the achievement roller coaster picture sort of moment and all that stuff. But there was a lot of that character information, which I could have sworn, if it wasn't directly trickling in, maybe conceptually it trickled into improvements to like the customer service tools and other stuff as well. Because when I first started in CS, it was you went to a log machine or you went to a machine where there's character data and you went into a couple folders and found the actual text file. Over time, it looked like CS was actually capable of like moving items or adding items just through an interface. You could see all the character data and all this other shit. And I thought that all came online roughly in that same period where it was like, hey, we have a new concept. Like there was an epiphany of like, okay, this is a different way to visualize this data and work with it.
Yeah, well, certainly for EQ2, it was a massive game changer for CS because we provided a ton of data out of the databases that we aggregated to find gold dupers and people that were doing crazy stuff because they would just show up as massive outliers in the data set, right, in the databases. So yeah, I think it definitely helped on the EQ2 CS side of things. And of course, the crazy thing about that time was just, what I love about all of the early days of EverQuest, even up through WoW. I think we've lost it a little bit now. Most of the MMOs that I see, they're just kind of trying to reinvent magic that kind of got lost a little bit. I think they struggle by games like EQ are so timeless. Although I've been playing a little bit of Albion Online lately, which kind of reminds me a little bit of UO, which is kind of fun. But I think what's interesting is the fact that back then we were only limited by our own imagination and what we could pull off with the time that the team had to work on it. That there was really no defined rule. Like if it hadn't been done before, that was okay.
Yeah.
We weren't really doing even data-driven analytics much back then, because we didn't have any data to do analytics on. You know, there were these massive log file programs, as you know, that were invented by CS to find, you know, excess gold dupers or certain things in some of the games. But the concept of being able to like do A/B tested game development, which we can do now in much more effective ways, didn't exist back then. Just the data tools and the systems and the dynamic content systems weren't available. So
yeah, I mean, about the closest thing we got to that was whoever had access to our actual churn numbers. I don't know if that was Russ or just Matt or somebody over there. Occasionally there would be this call of, it looks like churn's increased a little bit. Can you guys revamp a zone over the weekend and improve engagement? Like that was kind of the degree to which we understood like anything bordering modern analytics.
yeah, I mean, I was, so as you know, so when I went to work at SOE, after Station Plays kind of launched, I got pulled into running a lot of different platform in general. For those of you who don't know, the platform team are the invisible team behind the scenes, making sure that all of the non-game stuff that supports the games happens. So that's everything from account creation, character moves, billing, e-com, refunds, rename, like all that. And so, you know, Station Players was under that. Station Exchange, our little experiment at Real Money Trading, that was under that. I was in charge of the Station Launcher and the Station Pass initiative, bringing all the games under one all-access program, and figuring out how to make all of that work with entitlements and rebuilding the way that we even did account management, because that was, you know, as you know, it was a real mess. All bits flagged on accounts. It was super complex how we used to do it pre-databases, and we had to move all of that into databases. So those were all good times. And you know, as we got more into that sort of platform role, you know, it actually got to be more interesting because I certainly was working on a lot broader initiatives than just games. You know, I got involved in the team that was looking at a lot about acquisitions for things like the CCG games and Pirates of the Burning Seas, if you remember that from Seattle. You know, all the way through to evaluating. I think at one point we were looking at buying a flight simulator game, turning the planes into fish. And do you remember Project Aquarium? It was the aquarium game.
Yeah, because Fanny helped out on that. So my ex Fanny, she worked on that, and I think it actually wound up doing really well, like surprisingly well. If it wasn't that specific game,
CCG games did really well. The card games out of Denver at the Denver studio did really well. But yeah, I mean, so and that's what led me to eventually leave. You know, I eventually left I guess 2007-ish, 2008. So I did all that stuff in like 3 years. And then what drove me to start EEDAR, my research company, which I did, you know, Jeff Zack had gone up to Seattle, and he was working on the Matrix Online. And then they had another game. What was the other game they had?
Toontown?
There was one other game. It wasn't. I don't think the agency had started to be. Maybe it had. I think maybe they had started. I think Matt had started thinking about the agency. But so anyway, we went up to look at their. Warner Brothers wanted to at the time. Warner Brothers owned them, and then we bought them. And then we shut down the Matrix Online. And so then Jeff ended up being out of a job, and he moved from Seattle back down to San Diego, where he was originally from. And we got talking at a you know, Jeff's half Jewish, and so he celebrated that every year by having a bacon party. And so you know, Ralph Costa would come, and there was a whole bunch of us. We'd all come, and we'd basically gorge on bacon. And so I was at this Bacon Fest party, and we were talking about just looking for something. You know, he was getting ready to get back into something, and I said, well, you know, I've got this idea for a company, but it would be really, really, really hard, and some of it's outside my skill set. And he said, all right, tell me about it. And I said, well, I want to make a company where a game designer could go in and they could say, I want to make a first-person shooter set in World War II, and it would then give them a report, and it basically would give correlations that said 16-player multiplayer generates this much dollars versus 8-player multiplayer generates this much dollars, and 7 levels makes this much money versus 4 levels. I wanted to give designers tools that they could use so that they could make intelligent decisions around the features that they put into games. I mean, the reality is when you think about a game, 80% of that game is a slow evolutionary curve. Because if it doesn't evolve slowly, then what makes a first-person shooter or third-person puzzle and action game or a match 3 puzzle game? If they don't evolve slowly, then it's not that genre anymore. Right? It's a match 4 instead of a match 3. And so it's only about 20% of the game each time that is truly pushing the envelope, typically in a spectrum. Maybe it's your loot system, maybe it's your art style, maybe it's with Assassin's Creed it was the climbing mechanic and the crowd mechanic initially that really got Assassin's Creed to blow up. And so every time when you look at a game, most of the features you can get a blueprint and it's going to say this is the core feature set that you're going to have so that consumers will actually recognize what that game is, and then you polish up. But the problem is that a lot of designers, they don't know what that set of features is. They get, I think you and Scott were talking about, they used to get these big Bibles of like, go build all this. And it wasn't necessarily based on market research. It was just the lead designer or creative director who sat down with 2 people and they wrote it. There wasn't data. And so Jeff was really intrigued by this concept of building out a hierarchy of every feature mechanic that you could ever play. And so he went and locked himself in a closet for 18 months and built pretty close to that. I want to say the original version of the hierarchy had around 15,000 unique game elements that we could track. And so we went and raised a little bit of money, and we hired a bunch of ex-game testers out of San Diego, and they played games for 10 hours a day for a year and a half, and we built a database of every feature in every game that had ever been released back to the PlayStation 2. And quite a lot of PC, but PC was a lot harder. There were a lot more games on PC. So we were really focused on console at the time because it was a much more addressable market. It was a sort of more finite number of games that we needed to research. It was funny because I'd go into GameStop and I'd literally drop, $6,000 on the buy one, get one free used game sales. And I'd just clear out a store, when we were building the library and just trying to get everything and all the back catalogs up. Because digital games, you couldn't buy the games on the internet yet. The back catalogs didn't exist for console. Xbox 360 had only just launched.
I just had this image of you scrounging to swap meets in San Diego and like flea markets looking for any.
Oh yeah, no, we were everywhere, just pulling games in together. Our game libraries, were massive. They were awesome. And so then we built that up. We built this massive database, and then we started running these big data models around, can we predict what a review score might be for a game? Can we predict what sales might be for a game? And then we found out that we were missing a bunch of data that we needed, right? We needed marketing spend data. We needed to know all the Metacritic and review data. We needed to know which countries it had released in. Was it the same dev team? And so it was, obviously it's like renovating a house. Like it just gets deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
So Greg, we have a question. Who is the target client for this? Game studios or what were you picturing there?
It was originally, it's very interesting. So originally it was developers. That was who the original target market was. And in fact, our first product was called Design Metrics. And we basically pitched it as it's a game pitch in a box. So you could come to us before you even write a line of code on a game, write a story, and you could just tell us, this is the kind of features that I want to have in my game. This is sort of the quality that I think our team can achieve. And tell us how many that game could realistically sell in the first year if we launched it. And we would come back with a 15-page document with charts and graphs and data and supporting information that they could take into a publisher to help pitch their game idea. And it tanked.
It tanked.
Nobody wanted to buy it initially because there was a big pushback in the game industry about the balancing what we call the art and science of games. Which
I was about to say, don't bring your data bullshit in here. Listen, this is romance. This is romance. You're trying. Let's not min-max this.
It was one of those things that it was pretty interesting. When we first created it, nobody used it, and now you can't get a game funded unless you do it. So we really changed. We completely changed the way games get greenlit and funded for the most part through what we did with EEDAR. And that service expanded a lot to the point where we could be plus or minus 10% accuracy in sales 3 years before a game launched, which is pretty phenomenal. In terms of the ability for us to help figure out games. And then obviously as games went through the life cycle, we had products by the end where we'd go in every quarter and we'd see how the game was deviating. As we got closer to the de-scope phase where we had to sort of make tough decisions on which features would stay in or out of the game, we could run scenarios for the team and help them sort of get a feel for which ones were going to be really important versus which ones weren't. And then they could take that to a play test and focus test that and get some more feedback from people so that they would get the data side, but they'd get player opinion as well from the focus group around, and then they could make decisions. But the whole goal of this was to give the developers power again, because as you know, it used to just be marketing would come in and say, this is how it needs to be. And they didn't have necessarily data. They didn't, they might have had a little bit of focus testing, but they didn't have clarity to give the developers and the designers on what they're trying to solve. And so, I think, by the end of when I sold that business 5 years ago, and we'd worked on thousands of games that had been released in that time, very closely involved in a lot of console launches, managing all kinds of sales data for different companies. We did a whole bunch of things. It was a great business. And for me, it was awesome because I had spent 10 years working in MMOs, and I thought MMOs were like, when I came from Australia in my little studio shack making fan sites, and I worked at Sony, I was like, oh my God, it's Sony, this is amazing. And then, of course, I got out of that bubble into the bigger industry, and I'm like, oh my God, SOE was only, it's this big, So it was really cool, and it was a great chance to make even more friends in the industry. And work on some great products and titles, and help shape a lot of how the industry works. We built the industry's only consolidated digital sales service, which is now NPD, who's a sales organization, bought EEDAR office, and they run that now. We once again, a lot of firsts. I mean, it's been cool. A lot of people when we'll talk about latest business in a second.
I was about to say you went and did it again. It's like, all right, let's try another first.
And I hope that the industry catches up before I run out of money. But what's really cool is that a lot of people don't realize that I've worked in the games industry now for 25 odd years, and I've never worked directly on a game development. Right? I've had a great successful career. I've been able to contribute and shape tons of games and services that developers and players get to enjoy, but I get to do that on the side. And that's what led to my latest sort of business, which is called Interactive Entertainment Professionals, and it's an education program that people can do if they want to learn about all of the different roles in all the careers and all the skills that you need. Because I try to tell people all the time, we have lawyers and accountants and investors, and we have HR people, and you name it. Like, we're like a little social country unto ourselves. We have every career you could ever think of. And so, I go to school and I talk to these lawyers like, oh, I want to be a sports agent. I'm like, why don't you want to be an esports agent? Why don't you want to be a pro gamer agent? Like you love video games, don't you? They're like, yeah. They're like, but there's no job in that. I'm like, yes, there is. But we do such a job as an industry at promoting the fantastically broad careers that exist outside of if you want to work on games, it means you've got to be a game developer. And it's just, there's so many jobs that have to exist to help game developers do what they do.
Yeah, and we've done a poor job, I think, of also communicating. I think it's getting better as more and more things are essentially becoming games. Over the last decade, especially. But we've done a poor job of conveying the degree of or the complexity of what it is that we've been doing for 20 years at least in my case. It's MMOs are not simple products, and so the more I get to speak with people that are doing things that are maybe adjacent to gaming, other tech or whatever, and sort of really get into what it is that we've been doing. It's like one of the things that I've been talking to people about is I've been in software as a service for 20 years. I just didn't know I was in software as a service 20 years ago. I thought I was going to go work at a game company, and come to find out we're dealing with a complex piece of software that we're running as a live service, and it's been live operations for 20 years. So yeah, getting that out's helpful. And then getting out everything that's related to it in the broader sense, like you're saying, all of the marketing, all the lawyers, all of everything that's there. Um, I don't know. Maybe we're getting there. What are you seeing though, based on the work that you've been doing most recently? Like, is it clicking?
Well, it's interesting, right? So some people wanted to link to, they can go check out my lame ass website. We still, most of us are still game studios, right? Because a lot of what we do is new hire onboarding, training, general education. We do have I think it's $199 or something. You can log in as just an individual if you want to buy just buy the course and learn about the games industry and all the jobs that are in it. But we don't get that many people that do it. We don't promote it that well. Partly because we have great clients directly in the studio side, which is we're still a pretty small business overall with a good ROI for our time is. But what I think is really interesting, to your point about we've been doing games as a service, live ops, all these things for so long. I think that's why we do see so many people now as creative directors, heads of studios, or CEOs at game companies across all different platforms and distribution models, because we figured out years ago community management. We figured out years ago de-escalation methods on forums, and it's not to say that we're perfect at it. I mean, there's still griefing and bullying and trolling and all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of the best practices that are employed today by people on Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, or things that have nothing to do with games, that are using strategies and techniques and methods that were developed through the games industry and through what we learned running MMOs. And the fact that an MMO is essentially every single type of game you can all merged into one virtual world, thrown into a mix of hundreds of thousands of players who are out to min-max and break everything that they can and consume content as quickly as possible.
Not these guys, though.
It's stuff like learning through fire. You're basically working and operating the hardest game you could.
These guys make it easy. Nobody in chat would ever break anything. They wouldn't exploit. There's absolutely no bad behavior. I know every one of these people personally, and they've proven to me that they're pretty much, yeah. Bobby's an angel. So see, never. So referencing the other more difficult people that aren't in here. But yeah, other than these guys, you do have a fair point, Greg.
Yeah, I just think it's cool. I think it's cool that that we, and so what's interesting is after I sold EEDAR, before I started IEP, for a very short stint, I had another business that I still do some consulting work on time to time called Data DNA. And the general concept was, could we take what we'd learned at EEDAR about big data and analytics and this stuff and move to other industries like, insurance and consumer packaged goods and energy and banking and very, very lucrative businesses from a revenue perspective. And some of these people didn't even have like modern databases. Like it was just so amazing to me to realize, and we talk about it a lot when we go on trade shows, which the average consumer doesn't get to do, but games have always pushed tech so hard, and we are always chasing that extra CPU cycle, that's a way to render, that smarter technique we can use to optimize, a data call. And so many other industries benefit from technology that is built to help us create these experiences for entertainment, and then they trickle back. We're kind of like the NASA. NASA invents Velcro and dehydrated food and all these cool things that people get to go and eat. I feel like games and MMOs really, they push tech. They push what imagine. Think about your smartphone, right? Can you think for a minute the games are not the primary reason why they're getting faster and that they're getting better graphics and they're getting higher resolution screens and touch feedback sensitivity, and it's all because of games. It's all what the game developers want those devices to do. So I think it's cool. I think games is highly underrated. My mom used to tell me, like, quit playing your computer, you're never out to anything, you're wasting your life on games. And I see parents now who say that to their kids, and I call them out on it. I'm like, listen, your kid could, they're playing 12 hours of Fortnite a day or whatever. I mean, there's no reason, if they don't get good enough, that they can't get a college scholarship to go to school on that. They're playing Minecraft, that's great. They're learning programming and scripting and working with a team and problem solving and management. These are great skills. I still to this day think that EverQuest is probably why I have such a great memory for driving to places. Like, I could drive to a place once or twice, and I don't need a map ever again to drive there. And I think a lot of it just came from how many hours we had to spend learning our way around zones with no maps, with no, just remembering landmarks and approximately how long we had to run and where the skeletons were that were going to jump.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I noticed whenever I drive, I tend to just go around the edge of the zone and like avoid everything in the middle. So it's actually, that's probably why, right? I learned how to navigate from EverQuest. Yeah, basically going blind in terror on a zone edge.
Yeah, and I interviewed Raf Coster about this for AP coursework at one point, and he said what the studies show that our brains don't actually necessarily remember game content extremely well, but they definitely absorb and remember the systems. They remember the skills that we had to develop to use the content, and so things like understanding spatial awareness and timing, and all of these sorts of things that the brain has to learn in order to know. I mean, there are bards out there who I tell you, you could sit them in front of a keyboard again and they could start, dancing their fingers to play 16 songs at the same time. It's a skill that never goes away. And I think it's very similar to this sort of stuff. Someone asked if I have kids. I have one kid. She is 8, turning 9 this year. And actually, I've had her enrolled in Minecraft coding over this summer. Because she got really into it and she was watching YouTube videos and she was herself how to do it, and she wanted to go to that next level. She's also doing, she started getting into Roblox a little bit, but I want her to get a little bit more settled in doing some Minecraft stuff before she'll migrate up to playing around with some Roblox stuff.
Right on. So I'm going to touch my keyboard again so I don't get booted from the game. And while I do this, I need to get caught up. August Burnsville. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I'm pretty sure that it's like, what is it? Bucknerite or something. Is that the right pronunciation? You let me know. Patrick Faith, JH Liberty, Distorted Sock Puppet, and Pouty 80. You're going to have to tell me how to phonetically pronounce that. I ask in